I'm Benjamin Hall, and I'm searching for heroes. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Benjamin Hall, and this is Searching for Heroes. I want you all to try and imagine something. Imagine opening your eyes, not knowing where you are or who you are, and finding that your life was effectively missing. Your memories were gone. Everything around you felt totally new. Imagine that loss. Imagine that fear. Well, that happened to today's guest, Anne Howell, and she's told that extraordinary journey in her memoir, All That I Forgot. Now, Anne was a newspaper and magazine journalist in Sydney, Australia, when her life disappeared. While she was pregnant, she was diagnosed with a rare defect on the outer brain, and after giving birth, agreed to a 12-hour neurosurgery. Complications followed, and with them came retrograde amnesia. Anne woke without the memories that defined her, family, work, history, they were gone. She couldn't remember giving birth to her daughter. She didn't know who her husband was. And what followed was a second childhood inside an adult body, learning names, meanings, how to read and write, rebuilding trust, and discovering emotions without a backstory. So today in this conversation, we're going to go inside that first awakening, those early days of confusion, and then the painstaking work of relearning ordinary things. We're going to talk also about the first moment she saw her husband and her daughter, the bond they had to build, and how identity, I think, can be forged from choices, even when memory can't cooperate. So Anne, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a great, great pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for having me here.
Can we go back to that very first moment when you woke up in hospital, your first sight, your first sound, that first sensation, what you were thinking, who you were?
Yeah, there were two parts. Firstly was before I opened my eyes, and I'd had meningitis, and that comes with extraordinary pain. And to make sense of the pain, which was like a sort of burning sensation in waves, my mind made up scenarios just to make sense of things. I think our brains want a narrative and we want a story. And the first story was a bit wild, and it was that I was in a fire pit and there were little devils around me with capes on, and they were poking at me. And then that would fade out. And the second one was that I was on a battlefield and I'd been sort of slashed a bit. So my mind was just trying to make sense of things, and I probably had a fair bit of pethidine in me, I'd say.
Were you just suddenly afraid in that first moment?
I was very afraid, and it just confused because the scenarios were so strange and different. But the next thing was that I opened my eyes. And the scenario before I opened my eyes had been of the natural world. I'd been in a forest. And I expected something like that. And when I opened my eyes, the room was just so peculiar and human-made and sterile. The colours were so odd, and not one thing could I recognise. It all seemed impossible, invented, futuristic, like I'd come to a place that had no logic. And I just stared and thought, this can't be happening.
Because you had nothing to compare it to. Is it true that you didn't have the memories of what a hospital room would have looked like?
I would have been in ICU too, intensive care unit at that point. And there's just yourself and a bunch of machines and, bland walls. So it was probably quite spaceship. No, I had nothing to compare it to. So many things had been stripped away from me, including basic concepts, basic concepts, language particularly, my biographical history, the history of the world, in fact, had gone. Anything that I'd learnt had gone. It just for that very first set of moments. Yeah.
I mean, was someone by your bedside? Was there someone talking to you, trying to explain what was happening? And
I think people had been coming, but at that point, no one was there. And So quite soon, someone came towards me, and at first I had no idea what this thing was, and not being able to name is very frightening. And I'd woken quite childlike. Retrograde amnesia, I would later discover, often begins with you. If you're going to remember, you remember things from your very, very distant past, things that have been embedded in your memory for a long, long time. So I woke up very childlike, and I thought it was a creature. Then I went, no, it's a woman, and that's calmed me down a bit. And the woman came up to me, and she came towards me, and I said to her, I didn't know if I could have had words, but I did open my mouth, and I said to her, my head's on fire, because the pain was very much in my head. And then I said, but where am I? And she said, hospital. And I said, what? And she said, oh, you're in Royal Prince Alfred, Sydney. But I said, no, what's a hospital?
Gosh. But presumably they didn't realise that you had retrograde amnesia. And it must have taken them a little bit of time to realise that your memory had gone.
Absolutely. I mean, she trotted off because she probably thought, I'm a nurse, I think I need a doctor here. I'd gone in for one thing. I hadn't gone in with them expecting me to get memory loss. I'd gone in for an operation, and that went fine, but the memory loss was a whole other set of complications. So no, people weren't equipped around me necessarily.
So you've written that you think you went back to about having the memories of a 9-year-old. So could you remember your mother? Could you remember your childhood before that? Or how quickly did those early memories come back to you?
Early memories started coming back quite fast, but when I was told my mother was coming to see me, I remembered her as she would have been when I was 9 or so. So when this 60-year-old woman came in the door, I was shocked. I wasn't expecting this version of my mother, and I think I insulted her because I think I commented on how dreadfully old she was. And I called her mummy, and she said, oh, goodness, well, what's going on? It's one thing to see someone in a movie have amnesia, and everybody rallies around, but in real life, I think it's very hard for people to believe it's happening, and people don't respond necessarily. But there's a big lag between people being able to understand what's happening to you and in films, it's a totally different kettle of fish. Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you about Jason Bourne and those films in a little bit, because I know that he had retrograde amnesia, I think. But with your mother, did she come up and embrace you? And did you not have any emotional feeling towards her? And then how did those feelings of emotion affect you? Did you feel, well, I should be emotional back because that's clearly where I am, or not?
My mother, I can't remember ever hugging me much except when I was a little girl, and she certainly didn't at this time. She was very confronted. She wasn't dealing with it particularly well, I don't think. She was very confronted by the whole thing, and it would take me years to work out that she had her own traumas and her own difficulty, and she had a lot of difficulty with the past. And so I didn't really relate to her very well. I found her distant. I found her unbelievable. I didn't believe she was my mother. I thought she was a mother impersonator for a while there. She didn't convince me that she was my mother, but at the same time, I was very guilty because she'd come to claim me and I didn't have anyone. And I thought, what's wrong with me? Why don't I relate to her? I mean, not remembering it actually often instigated a lot of guilt in me because I felt this person is really important to me. Why can't I remember them? I didn't have the backstory. I didn't know the word amnesia yet. I didn't know what was happening.
It's interesting you were able to feel guilt. when, even though you couldn't feel the positive emotion towards her, you felt guilt, which is interesting.
I would soon feel some positive emotions. And it took me a lot of years to unpack. I didn't have an easy relationship with my mother. Loved her very much, but it was quite fraught from both sides. So, yeah.
What about the moment that you first saw your husband and your daughter? What do you remember from that moment?
Yeah. So Jose, his name was, walked in the door, and he was a striking-looking man, very well dressed, which I found incredibly intimidating because I was still in my young girl's mind thinking, wow, I've grown up and got a husband. I didn't know. I felt the husband was very adult of me, and I sort of understood that it was an intimate relationship. I had no recollection of him, and that just was strikingly clear. And I didn't even, I sort of was surprised that I would manage to find this very refined looking, man who, more to the point, was holding on to what I thought first was a pet. And I thought, well, now, why is he bringing this strange creature into the hospital? He sat down on a chair at the other end of the bed. So I looked past my feet to him, and this little creature he put on his lap. And I started to realize it was a she creature, and he started to bounce her on his lap. She was very pretty and beautiful, and she started laughing. She was very pleased with bouncing. My mother happened to be in the visitor's chair saying, oh, isn't it lovely? He's brought your daughter and she's all nicely dressed. And I kept thinking, what is a daughter? And slowly I started to feel that this daughter belonged to me, and I loved her, luckily. I had this very strong connection with her, very positive. Not that I recognised her either, but I just had this warm, strong feeling of belonging and wanting to look after her, which I'm grateful to this day that I had, because it both grounded me and gave me purpose and made sense. I needed sense in my life, and she was the first hint of that sense.
Amazing that you had those feelings without the backstory. And with other issues, you didn't have those feelings, but with your daughter, which, I think perhaps the most important relationship that you would have, there was this sentiment, there was a feeling there.
We'll be back in a moment with Searching for Heroes.
Can you explain how that relationship continued to grow? Well, first of all, how long were you in hospital before you were sent home? And what was going home like?
I don't think I was there very long. I don't know to this day, to be honest. But, I mean, I was in there. They saved my life, and that was done. I wasn't there to recover from amnesia. That was sort of a byproduct. And they gave me a test. And really at that time, and still to this day, I was in the public system and people needed the beds. And I think I fell through a few cracks, because nowadays I believe I would have services contacting me and, I would have all sorts of things. But I just went home on my own without a social worker or any such thing. And with a man I didn't really remember, a daughter I didn't remember, and a lot of parenting to do, and not much of a clue. And going home, it was extraordinarily confronting, because when I saw the house, I'd had such expectations that I would remember it. I must have built some hope, home is where the heart is, and all those sort of sayings. And I thought, look, I was longing for connection and memory and a sense of belonging, and really I didn't recognise it at all. And arriving there, I got a lot of attention in hospital. There was visitors and nurses and doctors, and while I might have not liked all that at the time, especially the needles that they poked into me, it was quite another thing that suddenly my partner went off to work and I was on my own with a small child.
suddenly you were there alone with your daughter. Did you know how to feed her, how to get her the water or change her nappy or any of the usual parenting roles?
He stayed home for a few days, and she was still on a bottle. I mean, I breastfed her for a while, and then she had to go onto a bottle. And I mean, she was heading for 1 year old, right? So she's not a baby. She's on her feet, and I learnt things. I picked things up. I learnt the routines. I had plenty of, there were his relatives in particular who had children, and there was lots of advice. Lots of advice came my way, and not because I had memory loss, just because other people were parents, and there's advice. I don't know that there wasn't a mother manual sitting there, and I think I'd expected to have this brilliant intuition, you know, being a woman and loving her so much. But no, I didn't even know that she really would cry a lot. I had a very idealized picture. I thought it was going to be all about playing with a little doll creature. I mean, I wasn't very mature. So it was a very tough road to realize that I was so responsible. I had to keep her active and stimulated and happy and well slept and all those things. I don't know. I really don't quite know how she's a beautiful person now. I just want to say she's had a gorge. I've got a little grandson, and she is a beautiful, people comment how lovely she is. So, you know, let's hope that my muddling along didn't, at least she survived that.
How quickly were you able to learn? I mean, was your mind withholding facts that came at you? So if you were told how to do something, could you quickly learn how to do it? Was it a mind that was open to learn?
I was desperate to learn and open. And luckily, retrograde amnesia is about you can form new memories. They're in there somewhere too. That's the other thing. You just misplaced them. They're somewhere in there. And I had body memory. So I had what's called procedural memory. I could find my hand doing something that my brain didn't know.
Such as what?
Oh, you know, I might be able to, I'd open a drawer knowing where the cutlery was, or so I'd lost biographical memory. I'd lost the narrative and the stories and the learning, but not the physical things. So my body knew things that my mind did not.
And were you then set up on this? Did you sit down with your family and just say, okay, this is the path I'm going to be on. I will have lessons every day? Because you couldn't read. You couldn't, you said words just looked like a mad jumble on a page. So did you have this, did you put in place a curriculum? Did you say, this is what we're going to learn and this is how we're going to learn it?
I wasn't that structured in my thinking, and I was much more lost than what you're talking about, somebody who can self-organize. Conceptually, I had trouble organizing my thoughts, let alone my strategy. So a lot of it was intuitive. I also didn't have the sort of family where there was much space to be the person that I was. It's hard to explain, but everyone was busy achieving. And I have since come across a woman in America, Sue Meck, who wrote a book, who had both retrograde and anterograde amnesia, which is more serious than mine. And she went home and just had to raise her kids, and she muddled along just like I did. Just taking, with a young child, you have to take each day as it comes. It's like having two jobs. I mean, they're busy creatures. So really, I stole bits of time for myself, and I tried to hunt through the house for clues as to who I was. And I had conversations with one or two really old close friends, and I just had to open books and try to teach myself to read.
Wow. Amazing. And I suppose on top of this, there was also you would come to learn that there was your husband the relationship there had not been so good. And so suddenly, this is another pressure. At what point did you realize that actually, at first, did you think you're going back into this loving husband and daughter? And at some point, did you realize, actually, it wasn't great before, and this is not going to be the future?
Yeah. The fact that he was so remote, the fact that I couldn't talk to him about what had happened to me, the fact that he didn't come home till well after normal working hours, it was clear from quite early on that there wasn't a proper connection between us. I just didn't know why, and I felt that it must be me not remembering him. But it was a lot more than that. People around me either didn't know or didn't want to tell me in case we could patch things up.
Yeah.
And he wasn't dealing with the whole thing very well. I mean, he had got together with a strong woman, independent. You know, I'd been working on a glossy, fashionable, working on a glossy magazine, and we'd had a child pretty fast, and he hadn't put his hand up for this person I became, and he retreated rather than came towards me, and, that's just how it was.
Yeah. So how old were you at the time?
I was 30.
Do you remember moments of joy at learning new things, or was it a constant fear of not remembering things? Like, did you have both extremes, positives and negative feelings?
Oh, yeah, look, you're still a person without a memory. And people said to me when I was even in hospital, oh, you still have a sense of humour. I mean, I tend to be I like a laugh. And being a child twice is kind of, some of it's great because kids are great, Yeah. So things were funny to me and amusing. Even in the middle of some drama, I'd think, look at me, I'm having an argument with my husband, or my very fancy partner. There was this I was quite cheeky as a child, and I've always been a bit of a wild girl. So, and there was great. I mean, for a long time, I couldn't taste my food, and just suddenly having taste again was just so brilliant. Or the first swim, I love swimming, and the first swim, just coming back into the world of sensation and tactile living, because the injury made my senses very dull, and I was very shut down, and it was hard to have joy for a while. Though, pain is not joy. So as the pain eased or subsided or changed, I could feel just well-being, and that was brilliant.
Were many people trying to tell you who you were? Were they trying to, you are this person, you care about that, you like these hobbies? And did you find that the person that they were explaining to you, who you used to be, was that the same person that you then became, or did you become someone totally different?
Oh, my mother did a bit of that. I mean, she wanted the pretty high-performance girl that she had when I was young and when I was a journalist. My mother loved to show off, and my mother's a very high-performing woman. She was top in her field in orthodontics, and, she was tough on herself and she was tough on her kids. And so she would represent to me, and she was also very keen on marriage. And so she would represent to me the version of me that she wanted. I don't think she meant it badly, but I ended up fighting against it because it wasn't really who I see myself as, and I don't think that that's uncommon. It was just an exaggerated version of that, because here you have this daughter who you can just tell her the good things, that tell her that your relationship is easy and that, you've always gotten along. And my mother and I had very long rifts at times. So she had this, empty slate in a way to I mean, I confronted her about things like that. I'm pretty direct. I said things to her about that sort of thing. And other people, look, everyone has their version of who you are. I mean, everyone has a subjective view of the world. So, of course, people, they feed back to you what they've learnt of you, and it isn't all of you.
Mm. So how about friends? Did you end up with the same group of friends, or did they feel totally different and foreign?
Or a lot of my friends were very caught up in their jobs. My pre-injury friends were just super busy. I mean, I was in newspapers, and I didn't know who some of my friends were, so I didn't ring around, did I?
Yes.
So I did end up with different friends, and I also changed in my tastes of people, I think. So, you know, I softened a bit. I mean, I think one of the gifts of having an injury, it sounds a bit corny, doesn't it? But, you know, that you slow down, that you have time, that you can stop and enjoy your own vulnerability and other people's a bit more, because you're not rushing around in the world achieving everything. So
perhaps you don't take things. Did you find that you didn't take things for granted? That you really appreciated how wonderful life could be, or that you were able to be alive and experience these things? Did you feel that sense?
I had been someone who probably didn't spend much time at home in the daytime hours. I was on the newspaper, and then I was at art openings. I did a lot of art reporting. And bringing up a child and having an injury that slowed me down meant a lot of domestic life that I really, really needed and loved. So, yeah, that's sort of more life in the slow lane.
What about sort of the longer term, as you started to rebuild who you were and the person you were going to become, person you did become? At what point did life just feel, I was going to say, normal again? At what point did you just click into, this is who I am now, as opposed to I am constantly learning, I'm trying to catch up, I'm trying to figure out who I am? Did you eventually, and after how long, did you reach a point where you were just the new you?
Oh, no, I think people are mad. I think we're all changing all the time. I don't think identity is as fixed as we think it is. So it's not like, I mean, I have thought prior to this interview, my memory is more intact than it was. I probably can remember quite well now. But it doesn't mean I can stay still, because we're always learning, and you have to connect with the world and its changes as well. But that mad hunt, I mean, I spent a lot of time looking into the past and collecting bits of information about my past. And some people say we need to live in the moment, you know, mindfulness, which is true. Need to both live in the moment. But if you've got your past at your fingertips, you're much more secure than if you can't remember it. So you need to dedicate a lot of your time to looking back, to restore your narrative. Well, that's how I've experienced it. Before you can feel comfortable, feeling anchored, feeling grounded, is really important.
Yeah, I think that's something many people take for granted as well. We just have that, so we don't realize how important it is. You do. You really get that. Was there any sort of, when things were, I'm sure there were times which were difficult and you were struggling to figure things out or learn something new. Was there like some sort of a ritual or mantra or even a person that you could lean on during those, the more difficult moments?
I had a really beautiful friend from childhood, and I found that I could be a bit more myself with her. I tended to hide from some people the extent of my memory loss because it made me feel inadequate and a bit stupid. And I mean, I couldn't read or write. You're illiterate in this culture. It's not that easy. So she was great for a while there. And later on, I started to say to myself, don't fall into self-pity or bitterness. You know, I'm a chronic migraine sufferer, so I still get bouts of pain and can't always function in the world. I just have to drop everything and do bed rest. And But the crucial thing for me, the mantra has been, I suppose, is that I'm not the only one. There's lots of people out there with invisible illnesses and things far worse than me. Stay connected, stay positive as possible. It will pass, and don't fall into sort of self-absorption or bitterness, because that's the enemy. That thinking, there's negative thinking, and that's where for me it can lie.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you sort of had to design a starter kit for someone else who's rebuilding their own life, after such memory life. Like, what would you say to them? How would you direct them? What advice can you give?
Yeah, I've noticed they have kits out for people with dementia, and a kit for memory loss would be a bit different, because my sort, not anterograde but retrograde, you can rebuild memory. So there would be some advice that would be about, and I've mentioned some of these already, grounding. Make sure you ground yourself through breathing or swimming or meditating, because your mind will be whirring around, and gather up your mementos and your favorite music and your contacts. Make sure you've kept your passwords in a safe place. Mm-hmm. Be gentle to yourself, because you might get cranky. It's very frustrating not remembering. You be gentle, kind to yourself. And find groups of like-minded, it's great. I mean, we've got a lot of media now, but there's other people that have gone through things like you. If you can read, there's some great memoirs out there of people that have had similar things, and there's books about brain plasticity and, workings of the mind and memory, and, connect with some of the great minds.
Yeah.
Connect with great information. Be mindful. There's a lot of information. Find the good stuff.
You mentioned dementia there, and I wonder, what do you think of dementia? How sort of similar would the memory loss at dementia be to what you had?
I imagine I would. I've been around a couple of people in the my relatives in the late stages of their lives with dementia, and it does look, there's quite a lot of similarities, but dementia, you can't rebuild your memories and think I will find my memory will become more functional. It's the other way around. And so I suppose the letting go part and the self-acceptance would be super important. And there is just lots of work out there on dementia. I believe they're looking at gene therapy at the moment, keep abreast of all the, medical science is amazing. So people with this condition just keep looking at what's available. And I hear music is fabulous, because you don't need a memory for some things. To enjoy music, you might have never heard it. There's lots of things that you can connect with others without memory.
Yeah. Was music something quite important early on? Could you just listen to a piece of music, and did that open you up? Did that make you feel new feelings? Did it?
The sadness with me is that music hurt my head a lot. So, I like rock music. So it wasn't, I like really thrashy sort of loud rock music, and it just wasn't as appropriate for who I became. But I remember, sometimes just, that trigger point. So memory, the trigger of music, Pink Floyd, I remember I got really triggered by hearing Pink Floyd and went right back into the past, or Van Morrison, or some jazz, those moments where, same with smell and sound and touch, those moments where just one sense gets affected and a whole world of memory is activated.
It's interesting, because you just said there wasn't appropriate to who I became. And I'm so curious as to whether the person you became, how different that person was to the person you would have become if you had not had this amnesia? Do you have any idea? I mean, it's impossible to really tell, but the experience itself must have made you stronger in some senses. It must have made you understand the quieter times, as you just said. Do you think that you actually, because of this experience, you became someone who was stronger? You developed an extra level of strength and feeling?
I think I'm less impacted by what people think of me than I was. Journalism, I can't imagine living that. I very much admire journalists, by the way. I think it's a fantastic profession, and I am forever saying in this country we don't appreciate our journalists enough. And some of my best friends to this day are really high-flying journalists, but I can't imagine living in that world because it's noisy and peoply and fast. And the person that I am just I did a story recently. I try to do something. I do want to contribute. So I tried to do some awareness raising about migraine, which I suffer. And I got a story in a big newspaper, but that 1 week of just meeting the deadline, I thought, my goodness, how do people did I really do that? So I am definitely different.
Well, we still feel that, I can tell you that, even having done it for many years. That deadline is still fearful to all journalists. Did you go back to work? Did you pick up a different career?
Oh, look, I went back. I went back to newspapers. I did regional newspapers, so my career sort of went downwards in terms of status. But I moved, and I moved out of the big city, and I went back to. I've done many years of journalism, and then I went into. I worked for an NGO, and I went into migrant and refugee affairs because I wanted to help people in that area. My mother came up in a big boat. It's different, World War II. Migration, but still migration, and now I write, novels, and I did a PhD in creative writing, and that really honed my writing skills. That was a fantastic, very hard but fantastic thing to do.
PhD in creative writing. You also went and studied philosophy.
I did.
Which I find fascinating. Were you just drawn to philosophy, into the mind, and how the different ways in which the mind can think and build memories? And that was presumably connected to the amnesia you suffered. I mean,
yeah, I'd studied philosophy before the injury, and in my crowd of people, everyone, I've often been in the visual arts, and everyone's was very involved in, especially the French philosophers back. I'm talking the 80s. I'm 64. So I went back to university, and really I just wanted to stimulate my brain in the best possible way. It might have been a bit ambitious looking back, but that's what I did. And strangely, my brain seemed to be able to absorb difficult information quite well at that point in time. So I surprised myself I focused so hard, but I'm much more prone to read novels now. I've gone much more into the human, individual novel story and memoirs than the philosophers.
We'll be back in a moment with Searching for Heroes.
I've got to ask once about Jason Bourne, because I know you've written about it in the past. People are fascinated. Has it actually been said that he had the same kind of amnesia? Did you have? And then what is useful about the depiction, if anything, of him? What is misleading about the depiction?
So Robert Ludlum did have 12-hour amnesia to write that book, I discovered. And the series. Yeah. Only 12 hours. But I read it thinking I would tear it to shreds, because I thought I've had this real experience of amnesia. And it's quite brilliant, really, because retrograde amnesia, he's done really well. Jason Bourne doesn't know who he is, but he can shoot a gun. He can shoot myriads of guns. The most unconvincing part of it is that he's a CIA operative, which if in real life, generally, if you have amnesia, you wake up and you're a bit ordinary. You're just a person. You don't tend to be an assassin or a spy, because most people aren't. But as a fiction, I mean, it's mainstream fiction. It's not that nuanced, but it's pretty good on the amnesia front from my point of view.
Oh, it's interesting. I'm going to go reread it. And then I suppose just to finish up, if you could speak to your 9-year-old self, to that girl, who woke up in that bed, you could give her some direction. If you could say, this is what you're going to face, or this is what would you say to her?
I suppose I want to be a bit glib, because I can think of all the really cliched things to say about everything will be all right and all. But I do want to say, if you get despairing, just remember when you were young, when I was young, I wanted to be a novelist, and you've got a cracker of a story there. So that when you can finally read later, when you can read and you apply yourself and you survive and you feel a bit better, you might write a novel or a memoir using those novelistic skills, and you can draw from real life.
And you've done that. Yeah. You wrote All That I Forgot.
I wrote All That I Forgot.
Even without being told, you went and you did it.
It took a long time.
Yeah. Well, that's true. How did you put those memories together? I mean, how did you write that book?
I had a very naive idea that because it was a memoir and I could write from memory, I wouldn't have to go and research anything. But in fact, this is not the case. And any memoirist will know that memory, it's a reconstruction. There's a thing that happened then. Memory is it uses your imagination. It's quite active. And you can get things very wrong. And I went back to two main people from that time, and I checked things out. I checked things out online, what was the hospital like? Was it really level 8 that I was on? Have I remembered all this correctly? It required a lot of interaction. Then right towards the end, when I got a publisher, they said to me, we want you to send it to all the key people in the book. And I thought, oh, no, really? And so I had to send it to some of these people. And my stepfather, who I was really, he was a character, and he loved Stalin and he loved dictators. And I give him a bit of a hard time in this book because, we had a Jewish Holocaust history, and, Hitler was not very, very liked in our family. And he would make jokes about Hitler all the time. And so I gave him a bit of a hard time in this book, and I was quite scared of his response. And he said to me, Anne, why aren't I more evil? And he loved the book, and he gave it to his friends, and he kept saying, my stepdaughter this and he was so proud of me. And I can't tell you how much I didn't expect that.
How funny. Well, thank you so much for speaking to us today. And I think more than anything, it's that you can lose everything. You can lose your memories, but just speaking to you, you can rebuild something that is just equally kind and interesting and curious about the world. And I think hopefully that should give everyone hope. Anyone who's going through something difficult or wants to change their life or turn their life around, or they can do it. And so I suppose I'll finish up with one question. If someone is trying to turn their life around, they're not because of amnesia, but because they're not happy with the direction they're going in, because they don't like certain parts of their life, can they, in the same way you did, rebuild a new sort of life? Do you think it's easy to forget and get rid of your past and to make a big U-turn?
I really think that, I had trauma. I have to say I had trauma, and it took me years to know that I did. And it was when I was doing stuck behavior. And trauma in Greek means wound, and it can mean a splitting off of the self. And I had medical trauma and I had other trauma. So I went to a professional, and I did rapid eye movement. And I've been twice in my life over big periods, and it's really hard going, but it so changed my life. So if you can't change your life yourself find somebody out there who they're dedicated, that you trust. I had beautiful, beautiful, loving, amazing therapists, not particularly intellectual people, just kind. And they moved things when I was really stuck.
Mm. Yeah, so there's always someone to reach out to. Anne, thank you so much for joining me today. A great pleasure to meet you. Thank you for sharing your story with us. And again, everyone can go out and pick up your book, All That I Forgot.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Well, thank you everyone for joining me today. And I think that was one of the most sort of almost fascinating guests we've had on, only because I can't imagine myself being in that position. I think that you care so deeply about memories and who you are and your identity and what builds your identity, that to imagine that was totally taken away from you feels scary. It feels like it's taken away your life. But more than that, I think what her story shows is that it doesn't matter if you want to leave it behind, if you don't remember anything, you can build it back up again. You find ways to do that. You find people who will help you do that. You find communities. You find someone who perhaps inspires you. Whether that is someone in person or whether that's a book you read, there are ways of rebuilding things that are lost. Now, in Anne's case, it was her memory. But in other cases, and particularly with our theme of rebirth at the moment, that can be anything that you might want to lose. You can replace it and rebuild it. And I'm also fascinated when she said that she forgot everything, but she remembered that feeling after a couple of minutes for her daughter. That compassion right there, that remained, even though at first she thought that she was some kind of an animal, a little doll. She knew there was a feeling there for the daughter, and I think family perhaps is something that you can never really take away. But anyway, thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you for listening to the podcast. And again, I hope you can use it as motivation in some sense. If you're going through anything that's difficult, you can pick yourself up and you can find a way through it and you can rebuild. So you've got to put in hard work to do that, and I know that all of you can. So thank you for joining me, and I hope you'll join me again next week. Go and have a great one.
Thanks for listening to Searching for Heroes. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcasts Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.